It was supposed to be a simple idea. I'm a physics major. My final paper had to connect a historical scientific figure with modern tech. Most people picked Einstein, Bohr, Feynman. I picked Tesla. Not because I thought he was magical, but because I thought he was misunderstood. That was my first mistake. I started with public archives, patents, lectures, letters. He was prolific, eccentric, erratic. But buried in the noise, you could see patterns. He wasn't chasing fame or profit. He was chasing structure, resonance, harmony. It didn't feel like invention. It felt like translation, like he was reading something already written, in energy. I focused on Wardenclyffe, the massive tower he built on Long Island in the early 1900s. Every source said the same thing. A failed experiment. An abandoned transmitter. A dream undone by money. But the dates didn't line up. And then I found a footnote in a 1993 engineering journal that changed everything. The note mentioned a letter from Tesla to J.P. Morgan that was never sent. It was dated after the funding was pulled, when the tower was already half built. But the letter didn't beg for money. It warned. The global energetic web must not be entrusted to those who see only coin. Its implications exceed profit. It may touch the will of man. No one cited the letter. No archive linked to it. But the journal listed a call number from a university in Belgrade. I emailed the university. Waited 2 days. No response. Then, without explanation, I got a PDF from an anonymous academic account. No message. Just the file. I opened it. It wasn't just a letter. It was an entire bundle of Tesla documents, unsorted, partially translated, some in his own handwriting. Some pages were scorched. Others had water damage. But one thing stood out. A hand-drawn cross-section of Wardenclyffe Tower. And under it, a phrase in English, written in all caps. Not for transmission, for resonance lock. I had no idea what that meant. But the diagrams didn't look like a radio tower. They looked planetary. Like Tesla wasn't trying to send messages. He was trying to tune the Earth. I brought this to my professor. He skimmed through it, raised his eyebrows, and said, "Where did you get this?" I told him. He handed it back. Quietly. "Stick to published work, okay?" That's when I knew I was onto something. I dug deeper. The tower's design had layers no one talked about. A deep underground shaft lined with copper and quartz. Frequency markers noted in hertz that matched natural brainwave ranges. Marginal notes with phrases like bio-entrainment and field stabilization. Tesla wasn't just playing with power. He was building something that could interact with the human body. And that was before I found the page labeled simply the hum. It described a low-frequency pulse, not loud, but persistent, that could retune emotional agitation and restore passive coherence. It read like pseudoscience. But then I checked the frequency. 7.83 Hz. I froze. That's the Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic frequency of Earth's atmosphere. Tesla discovered it decades before it was officially measured. That's when everything changed. This wasn't a man trying to send electricity without wires. This was a man trying to connect energy, emotion, and consciousness across a global frequency band. He wasn't ahead of his time. He was outside of it. And J.P. Morgan? He funded the project until Tesla told him it couldn't be metered. No wires. No utility company. No profit. Just free energy. Free balance. And as soon as Morgan realized that, the funding vanished. The tower stopped. And the silence began. I thought that was the end. Until I found one diagram in the file with a watermark I didn't recognize. Recovered under Directive APL 33, U.S. Office of Alien Property Custodian. That department hasn't existed since 1966. But it's the same office that sees Tesla's work the morning after he died. And apparently, they didn't burn all of it. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't even angry. It was something much colder. A page and a half. Typed. Signed and stamped unsent. Never folded. It began. To continue this endeavor, we must leave behind the chains of exchange. The future cannot be wired through the cash register. No one talks like that today. No one would dare. Tesla had already begun building the tower. Morgan had funded it under the assumption it would revolutionize wireless communication, telegrams, radio, profit. But Tesla had gone further. He was no longer talking about data. He was talking about vital fields, about the energetic coherence of all living systems. And that was the problem. Further in the letter, he writes, "Monetization is the wall against which great invention breaks. I offer not a service, but a shift, one which renders ownership obsolete." And then this line, underlined in pencil, "The planet does not charge you for light. I merely learned how to carry it to you." That was the moment I understood. Tesla didn't want to sell energy. He wanted to free it. A separate page had a hand-drawn seal, a spiral within a triangle. Below it, resonance architecture, not delivery, but unlocking. It wasn't power transmission. It was field activation. Every mention of energy was paired with terms like limbic regulation, vibratory immersion, nonverbal instruction, biological unification. The man wasn't building a power grid. He was building a frequency key. But here's what shook me. One margin note read, "Not safe for centralization." A benevolent field can be inverted with ill intention. Even Tesla knew. If this fell into the wrong hands, if someone rewired it not for harmony, but for control, it wouldn't just empower the world. It would quiet it. I looked again at the signature, and underneath, faintly, letter held under seal by order of Mr. P. I didn't know who Mr. P was. But then I checked the archive logs. This letter came from a collection that was transferred to private holdings in 1943, then returned to the U.S. under seizure by the FBI. And do you know where they took it? Not to a museum. To a warehouse operated by the Office of Alien Property Custodian. The same agency that took everything Tesla owned after he died alone in a New York hotel room. I kept scrolling through the scans. There were fingerprints visible on the letter, enlarged as part of the restoration record. Only 3 fingers had prints. The others were smudged, not like someone touched it. Like someone held it long enough to sweat through it. As if they knew. This can't go out. Not because it's false, but because it's true and too true to sell. I closed the file. My hands were shaking. And I realized I hadn't eaten in 12 hours. But I wasn't hungry. I was angry. Because the man who dreamed of lighting the planet was stopped by the man who wanted to build it by the hour. And the rest of us? We never even got the choice. Everyone says the same thing. Wardenclyffe was a failed experiment in wireless communication. Tesla wanted to beat Marconi. It didn't work. They're not lying. But they're not telling the truth either. Because the tower did work. Just not in the way the world wanted it to. After I read the letter, I went back to the engineering diagrams. Most of them had been archived as curiosities, overambitious design, pseudo-scientific speculation, etc. But that's not what they were. One cross-section revealed the truth. The tower had 3 layers. Above ground, a copper dome connected to a metal lattice, tuned like a bell tower. Underground shaft, nearly 120 feet deep, lined with specific minerals, quartz, hematite, graphite, all with piezoelectric properties. Radial grounding field, a circular pattern beneath the foundation, precisely the same diameter as the Schumann resonance wavelength at Earth's surface curvature. That's not a coincidence. That's a resonance chamber. The deeper I dug, the more the pattern emerged. Tesla wasn't transmitting. He was activating. The blueprints didn't list frequencies in megahertz. They used terms like body harmonics, delta wave synchronization, atmospheric coherence points. And instead of signal strength, there were words like immersion radius, perceptual field influence, inner quieting threshold. This wasn't a tower for communication. It was a tower for tuning consciousness. One note written in the margin in Tesla's handwriting read, "The earth hums. All life hums with it. If the hum is clear, the mind is clear. If the hum is interrupted." It trailed off. But someone else had added, in pencil, later, "Then the chaos begins." I found a 1916 interview with Tesla buried in an old electrical journal. He said, "My tower does not send. It summons. A tuning fork for the nervous system of man." That quote was never republished. That issue was pulled after only 500 copies. Most were destroyed. I only found it because a university librarian had scanned it as part of a personal side project. But here's what made me freeze. The internal layout of Wardenclyffe, the rooms, hallways, even the stairs, was structured using harmonic ratios. The Fibonacci sequence. The golden ratio. Even the placement of support beams followed Pythagorean pitch intervals. This wasn't engineering. It was architecture of intention. The whole tower was built like an instrument, meant to resonate with something far beyond steel and soil. And what happens when you play the wrong note? The system corrects you. That's when I understood why the tower had to be shut down. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked on the wrong frequency. A frequency of coherence, of balance, of unprofitable clarity. And for a world run by chaos, distraction, and billing cycles, that kind of frequency is a threat. People didn't need to plug in. They just needed to be near it. The closer you were, the clearer your thoughts became. The calmer your body. The more resistant you were to suggestion. It wasn't magic. It was just nature, unleashed. Now imagine that tower replicated globally. Not for data. Not for media. But for harmony. Now imagine trying to sell pharmaceuticals in a world where stress and fear are no longer programmable. Now imagine trying to control a population when their minds are tuned to nature, not to headlines. Now you see why Wardenclyffe didn't fail. It was eliminated. No announcement. No meeting. No debate. Just silence. One day the tower rose. The next, the wires stopped coming, the workers disappeared, and Tesla was alone again. The official story says J.P. Morgan lost interest. But I found a letter in the same Belgrade archive, unsigned, unreferenced, and unscanned until last year. It's dated July 13, 1903, 2 weeks before the funding ceased. The letter wasn't from Tesla. It was to him. Just one line in Morgan's tight cursive. If it cannot be metered, it has no place in the market. That was it. Tesla responded 3 days later. His reply is barely legible, written in haste, full of ink bleeds and corrections. But one line is clear. What you call the market is but a shell for what humanity might become. I cannot quantify the rain. I only wish to teach us how to feel it. No answer followed. And from that moment, Wardenclyffe was cut off. But that's not the part that chills me. Here's what does. At the bottom of Morgan's letter, in red pencil, someone added a note. Ensure no duplicates of the core design remain. The handwriting doesn't match Morgan's. It matches the FBI memo I found later in the alien property custodian file. Same stroke. Same pen pressure. Same phrase. No duplicates of the core design. I went back and checked public records. J.P. Morgan held investments in Western Union, General Electric, Edison Electric. AT&T. Early utility infrastructure in 17 states. A man who profited every time someone plugged in. A man who understood that wireless power wasn't just bad business. It was the end of business. Let me put it plainly. Tesla didn't fail. He was redlined by the most powerful banker in America. Because the machine he built would have ended the need for banks, grids, or dependency. It wouldn't have created consumers. It would have created sovereigns. And the world wasn't ready for that. Not then. Maybe not now. I checked newspapers from that month in 1903. Not a single article about the cutoff. Not a whisper. But the week after, a new headline, front page. Marconi sends wireless signal across the Atlantic. Tesla's story was buried beneath the wave of a competitor who sold what he transmitted. No resonance. No field tuning. Just market-ready radio. And that was enough. The tower sat unused for years. It became a joke. A relic. Then a ruin. Until the land was sold. The shaft filled in. And the story erased. Or so they thought. But what if someone copied the blueprints? What if one of the engineers took a trace home? What if the hum never truly stopped? I don't know. But I do know this. The day Morgan cut the funding wasn't the day the tower died. It was the day they started hiding it. Tesla died alone. January 7th, 1943. Room 3327. New Yorker Hotel. His rent unpaid. His name mostly forgotten. The man who once lit the World's Fair with wireless current. Died surrounded by pigeons, sketches, and notebooks no one had read in decades. But someone still cared. Because less than 24 hours later, the FBI walked into that hotel room with a federal order. And they took everything. They called it securing assets belonging to an enemy alien. Tesla was a U.S. citizen. But the Office of Alien Property Custodian still seized 2 trunks, 1 filing cabinet, 15 notebooks, dozens of blueprints, and 1 locked metal box labeled Harmonics, Volume 4. None of it was ever returned to the family. None of it appeared in public archives. Here's where it gets strange. According to an internal memo I found later, the FBI immediately contacted MIT. A physicist named Dr. John G. Trump, yes, that Trump, was assigned to evaluate Tesla's materials. His report? The subject's ideas are speculative and do not present immediate military utility. That line was quoted in nearly every article for decades. But the full report? Still classified. And here's the part no one tells you. In 1952, the US government declassified a small fraction of Tesla's work. What they released were irrelevant pages, early coil sketches, circuit ideas, vague notes. But the real material? The high-frequency harmonic experiments? The diagrams from Wardenclyffe? Still sealed. Still missing. I found a reference to a shipment in a naval logistics document. Box 12B, transferred from 3327 New Yorker Hotel, January 8, 43. Contents, energy resonance, full log. Destination? Wright Field, Ohio. That's now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Long rumored to store classified aerospace and experimental tech. The same base tied to Project Blue Book. The same place people say Roswell wreckage was sent. Coincidence? Maybe. But a field built to suppress gravity would look an awful lot like Wardenclyffe. Flipped upside down. I tracked down a man who used to work in military archival transport. Retired now. When I asked him about Tesla, he didn't blink. He just said. There were pages that hummed. The ink vibrated. We wore gloves, but still. Some of US couldn't sleep right after that. I asked him where those pages went. He shrugged. Not storage. not destruction. They don't destroy knowledge like that. They repurpose it. And then he said something I'll never forget. If the tower didn't die when he did, maybe the program didn't either. So here's what I believe. Tesla wasn't erased. He was absorbed. His silence bought. His brilliance refiled under secrecy. Because the best kind of power isn't the kind you use. It's the kind no one else gets to. I wasn't looking for it. By this point, I had already accepted that everything real, the notes, the blueprints, the designs, was either destroyed, buried, or sealed away. But then I took a weekend trip to a university library 3 states away. They had received part of a Cold War-era microfilm archive from a decommissioned Air Force records unit. It was nothing special. Mostly export records. Weather logs. Farming subsidies. But I was bored. And curious. So I asked for real #342b, marked soil conductivity variances, classified region. The librarian hesitated. That one hasn't been requested in 17 years. He brought it out anyway. I loaded the reel into the reader. And what I saw made me stop breathing. The first few frames were soil maps. But at frame 12, something shifted. There was a schematic, not of land, but of subterranean metal arrays. And the label on the blueprint? Field Induction Matrix, Design Prototype C, Warden 3. Wardenclyffe. They'd hidden the resonance tech under soil conductivity research. I scanned further. Page after page, formulas, field radius estimates, frequency thresholds. It wasn't energy infrastructure. It was bioenvironmental tuning. One frame showed a top-down illustration of a tower, with overlapping circles expanding outward like a ripple in water. Each circle labeled with things like emotional dampening perimeter, suggestibility reduction zone, cortical resonance buffer. They were mapping the influence of the tower on human thought. Then I found a document labeled Notes, Experimental Implementation via Ground Seeding Arrays. The language was technical. Deceptively so. But one sentence stood out. Subconscious entrainment appears strongest within 2 to 5 Hz bands. Exposure correlates with reduction in combative ideation. Translation? Low-frequency fields reduce resistance. They don't suppress thought, they soften the urge to question. Not shock. Not silence. Just dullness. Like slowly turning the world's volume down. On frame 47, I found something else. A memo. Dated 1962. Marked Property Custodian Review Only. It read, Tesla's harmonic array is not to be viewed as obsolete. Its applications are not public-facing, but still viable under MK-level asset containment. Recommendation, relabel under Agritech and Soil Resonance Logistics. That's why I found it in the agriculture section. Not by accident. By design. I copied what I could. But the librarian stopped me before I could finish. That reel can't leave the room. I asked why. He shrugged. It's marked as unscannable by federal request. We keep it for completeness. No one reads microfilm anymore. I walked out of that library with 6 hand-drawn pages in my pocket. And a hum in my ears that wouldn't go away. They didn't destroy Tesla's ideas. They disguised them. Filed them away under names no one would ever look for. Because the best way to hide truth? Don't deny it. Just mislabel it. I went home that night with a backpack full of sketches. Pages I'd redrawn by hand. Symbols I didn't understand. Ratios that seemed more musical than mechanical. I pinned them to the wall of my apartment. And for the first time, I stopped trying to understand them with formulas. I tried to feel them. And that's when I noticed something strange. One diagram, a spiral overlaying a dome, reminded me of something. I opened a sound design app on my laptop. Mapped out the angles as if they were frequencies. The result? A near-perfect harmonic chord. Not random numbers. Intentional tonality. Tesla didn't just want to move energy. He wanted to tune reality. One note I had copied from the reel stood out. It was labeled second-order harmonic influence, cognitive domain. Below it, preliminary data suggests synchronization within this range affects decision latency, stress response, group coherence. Group coherence. Not just brain activity. Behavior. There were footnotes, too, scattered across several pages. Possible entrainment effect, subject unaware of shift. Initial symptoms, clarity, calm, quietude. Secondary effect, compliance. Not a mind wipe. A frequency nudge. This wasn't mind control in the Hollywood sense. This was gentle realignment. You'd still feel like yourself. You'd just stop wanting to rebel. One sketch showed two towers facing each other across a valley. Underneath, a phrase. Counterphase geometry to cancel descent. I stared at that for a long time. Not suppressing thought. Canceling descent before it forms. And here's where it got darker. In one of the pages mislabeled as atmospheric data, there was a table of observed outcomes. 3 columns. Exposure duration. EEG pattern shift. Behavioral markers. At 3 hours, relaxation. At 5, lowered startle reflex. At 12, reduced verbal opposition. At 24 plus, emotional flattening / pacified ideation. The final row read, 72 plus hours, emergent harmonization / identity coherence. What does that mean? What does it mean when identity becomes coherent? That's when I remembered something Tesla said in an obscure interview from 1928. If we can harmonize with the deeper tones of nature, we will forget the language of war. At the time, everyone thought it was poetic nonsense. Now I'm not so sure. I think Wardenclyffe wasn't built to power cities. It was built to retune the species. Not through ideology. Not through force. Through resonance. A biological, planetary alignment device. And it might have worked. Too well. Because once you remove aggression, ego, and dissent, you don't just make peace. You make people unprofitable. No ads work on clarity. No fear sells in calm. No leaders rise in silence. The world as we know it runs not on power, but on disruption. And Tesla had discovered a way to interrupt the interrupters. That's why they shut him down. Not because they feared what he could destroy, but because they feared what he could restore. After everything I'd found, the buried blueprints, the harmonic tables, the canceled letters, I needed a break. So I stopped researching. I went back to life. Or at least I tried. But something had changed. Because now, I started seeing Tesla everywhere. I'd be scrolling social media and see an ad for EMF wellness patches promising better sleep through electromagnetic calibration. I'd see smartwatches claiming to adjust your stress with haptic feedback. Neurofeedback headbands. Sleep pods. Sound healing apps that use binaural frequencies to alter brainwaves. Language like retune your mind. Synchronize your nervous system. Feel the alignment. I used to think this was harmless marketing. Now I'm not so sure. Because the more I looked, the more the pattern emerged. Everything Tesla built. Frequency tuning. Emotional harmonics. Field-based influence. It's all back. Just hidden behind different words. Tesla called it planetary resonance. Today, they call it ambient personalization. Tesla wanted to broadcast coherence. Today's tech says it offers calm and clarity. But only if you wear the device. Only if you subscribe. And here's where it got chilling. One product, a high-end neurostimulation band, had a patent number. I looked it up. The filing references adaptive frequency response modules based on biospheric signal variants. Buried in the appendix? A line that nearly made me drop my phone. Low bandwidth frequency entrainment originally explored via unsanctioned harmonic field prototypes, 1901 to 1917. Wardenclyffe. They didn't erase it. They integrated it. But that wasn't the worst. I checked Tesla's original field map. It showed concentric resonance rings around the tower site, each labeled with predicted psychological effect. Then I opened a 5G deployment coverage map from a telecom site. They matched. Ring for ring. Zone for zone. The difference? Tesla's model sought harmony. This one maximized penetration density. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying your phone is a mind control device. But I'm saying this. The infrastructure we use every day. The towers, the pulses, the always-on ambient mesh. Is built on frequencies Tesla mapped for consciousness. He designed them for peace. But in the hands of profit and power, they become something else. I started testing the theory. I took one of Tesla's frequency ratios, the 7.83 Hz earth tone, and tried to replicate it with a tone generator. I played it through speakers at low volume while scrolling social media. Within minutes, my mind cleared. I stopped scrolling. Not because I was bored, because the urge was gone. No craving. No distraction. No stimulation loop. It was like someone had pressed mute on the chaos. Tesla didn't want to hypnotize the world. He wanted to deprogram it. And today, the same frequencies are used. But not to clear your mind. To keep it busy. Hooked. Tuned to a frequency just off-center. Enough to keep you needing another fix. Tesla built an instrument. Today, they built a jukebox. And they're the ones picking the song. There's a difference between something that breaks and something that's shut off. Wardenclyffe didn't collapse. It wasn't destroyed in a storm. It didn't fail. It was turned off, abandoned, and erased. Because it did exactly what it was designed to do. And that terrified the wrong people. I found a 1947 memorandum buried in a post-war logistics report. It referenced historical infrastructural risk sites, including hydropower dams, early airship hangars, and one other entry. Wardenclyffe Tower, status, disassembled. Prior utility underestimated. Recommend continued silence. Continued silence. Not demolition. Not declassification. Just absence. Silence is a strategy. If you destroy something, people ask why. They investigate. They dig. But if you just quietly erase it, if you let it rust, let it fade, let it become a trivia fact, then no one asks anything at all. Wardenclyffe is barely a footnote now. A black and white photo. A caption in a science textbook. An early failed experiment in wireless power. That's the official story. But the more I read, the more I realized. Tesla didn't fail. He succeeded too early. And too purely. I found a quote from one of Morgan's business partners, buried in a private journal now digitized by accident. Tesla's tower doesn't threaten the market. It threatens the need for a market at all. That's it. Wardenclyffe wasn't a technological problem. It was an ideological threat. A world without scarcity. Without switches. Without subscriptions. Without obedience. And that's the kind of world systems don't survive. Every blueprint, every node I found, pointed not just to energy, but to sovereignty. The kind you can't sell, can't meter, can't moderate. So they did the only thing they could. They didn't break the tower. They didn't sell the land. They silenced it. And in its place, they built a new tower. Thousands of them. Taller. Faster. louder. But none of them hummed the way Wardenclyffe did. And maybe that's the final legacy. Not that Tesla's dream died, but that it was so powerful, so elegant, so dangerous to those in charge. It had to be removed, without a sound. I haven't told anyone what I found. Not in full. I tried, once. Started to explain the resonance fields, the maps, the tower. And their eyes glazed over. Not because they didn't believe me. Because they couldn't feel it. But I could. And I still can. There's something I never said, something I haven't written down until now. After I pinned those sketches to the wall. After I played Tesla's frequency through my speakers. After I matched the 7.83 Hz tone with the diagram from the misfiled archive. Something happened. It wasn't dramatic. The lights didn't flicker. My phone didn't glitch. No voices spoke to me. But the hum, the one I thought was in my head, moved into the room. It was real. Low. Subtle. Just beneath hearing. But there. Like a presence. Like the sound of something that had been sleeping. And had just remembered it was still alive. For weeks, I heard it only in that room. Then I started noticing it in other places. In the library stacks when I walked past certain shelves. In subway tunnels, far from signal zones. In forests, where no towers stood but the wind still carried a pulse. And I began to wonder. What if Tesla didn't build a tower to generate something? What if he built it to amplify what's already here? We think the world is silent. That nature is still. But maybe we're just too loud to hear it. Maybe Tesla wasn't trying to invent resonance. Maybe he was trying to return us to it. That's why the hum never left. Because you can't kill a frequency. You can only tune away from it. I don't know what to do with this knowledge. I don't want to start a movement. I don't want to expose some secret cabal. I'm not interested in being believed. All I know is this. In a world full of noise, Wardenclyffe was silence. Not emptiness. Not void. Clarity. And the blueprints they buried? They still hum. Not just on paper. Not just in steel. In us. In those who still pause before believing the headline. Who still feel something wrong in the static. Who still hear something. Just beneath the noise. So if you've ever heard it, that low, strange calm, that doesn't come from music or rest, but from something deeper. Don't ignore it. It might be Wardenclyffe. It might be Tesla. Or it might just be you. Finally vibrating. At the frequency they tried so hard to erase.